December 23, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The ammunition was gone. Every rifle, every machine gun, every grenade. 40 men of 2nd Platoon, Easy Company, surrounded in a frozen forest, had fired their last rounds. And the Germans were coming again. Staff Sergeant William Harris stood in the center of the defensive perimeter, looking at his men, exhausted, wounded, out of ammunition, but still standing, still holding their positions. The Germans, estimated at over 100 soldiers, had been attacking for 3 hours, probing, testing, trying to break through. 2nd Platoon had held, through sheer determination and accurate fire. But now the fire had stopped, not by choice, by necessity. Harris checked his own weapon, M1 Garand, empty. No more clips. He looked at the men around him. Private Morrison, empty rifle, fixed bayonet. Corporal Jackson, empty carbine, knife drawn. Private Hayes, empty bar, entrenching tool in hand. Every single man out of ammunition. But none of them had run. None had surrendered. They stood there in the frozen forest, waiting for Harris to tell them what to do next. Harris knew what Doctrine said. When surrounded, out of ammunition, and facing superior forces, surrender. Preserve the lives of your men. Live to fight another day. But Harris also knew something else, that his platoon was defending a road junction, the only road that connected 2 American defensive sectors. If the Germans took this junction, they'd cut the American line in half, divide the defense, destroy units piecemeal, and 2nd Platoon was the only thing standing between the Germans and that objective. Harris made a decision, the kind of decision that soldiers make when there are no good options, only bad ones and worse ones. He called his squad leaders. "We're out of ammunition." They nodded. They knew. Germans are forming up for another attack. They know we're not shooting back. They'll come hard. Silence. We can surrender, or we can charge. Corporal Jackson stared at him. Charge? With what? Harris lifted his rifle. M1 Garand, bayonet fixed. With these. What Harris was proposing, what he was about to order, was something that hadn't been done in modern warfare for decades. A bayonet charge. 40 men, armed with nothing but fixed bayonets and desperation, charging over 100 German soldiers. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was the only option that wasn't surrender. And sometimes, the only choice that makes sense is the one that makes no sense at all. Who was William Harris? William Robert. Harris was born in 1919 in rural Tennessee, farming country. His father worked a small farm. Tobacco, corn, barely enough to survive. William grew up understanding that sometimes you had to fight for what you had, not with words, with action. His father had a saying, when someone's coming to take what's yours, you don't ask permission to defend it, you just defend it. William learned that early. At age 12, he and his father fought off a group of men trying to steal their livestock. Just the 2 of them, against 4 men. His father had a shotgun. William had a pitchfork. They didn't back down. The thieves did. That lesson stayed with William. That sometimes, showing you're willing to fight, really fight, is enough to win. When the war started, William enlisted in the Army in January 1942. Infantry. He didn't want anything else. "I know how to fight on the ground," he told the recruiter. "That's what I'll do." Boot camp, infantry training, advanced leadership course. William was a natural leader, not because he was charismatic, but because he was calm under pressure. Never panicked, always made decisions. Right or wrong, he made them. And soldiers follow leaders who make decisions. By December 1944, William was a staff sergeant, platoon sergeant for 2nd Platoon, Easy Company. He'd been in combat for 6 months. France, Belgium, Germany. He'd seen soldiers break under fire, seen them freeze, seen them run. And he'd learned that the difference between units that held and units that broke wasn't training, wasn't equipment. It was leadership. One person who stood firm. One person who said, "Follow me," instead of "go." William had been that person for his platoon for 6 months. And on December 23rd, he would be asked to be that person one more time, in the most impossible situation imaginable. The Germans who thought they'd won the German unit attacking 2nd Platoon was a reinforced company from the 12th SS Panzer Division, approximately 120 soldiers. Experienced, well-equipped. They'd been fighting on the Eastern Front for 2 years, transferred west for the Ardennes offensive. Their commander, Hauptmann Klaus Weber, knew the American unit ahead was out of ammunition. His scouts had reported that the Americans had stopped firing, which meant they were either dead, surrendered, or out of ammunition. Weber formed his company for the final assault. 3 platoons, 40 men each. They'd advance in a line, sweep through the American position, accept surrender if offered, kill anyone who resisted. Standard procedure. At 14:45 hours, Weber gave the order. Advance. The German line moved forward, through the frozen forest, over snow and ice, rifles ready. But no one shooting, because there was no return fire. The Americans were quiet. After 100 yards, Weber could see the American position. A small clearing, foxholes, bodies, wounded, and 40 soldiers. Standing. Not in foxholes. Standing. In formation. Weber stopped his advance, studied the Americans. They weren't surrendering, weren't waving white flags. They were just standing. Rifles held at port arms. Weber called to them in English. "Americans, you are surrounded. You have no ammunition. Surrender, and you will be treated as prisoners of war." Harris, standing at the front of his platoon, didn't respond, just stood there. Weber tried again. "You cannot win. Surrender now." Harris raised his rifle. M1 Garand, bayonet fixed. And then he did something Weber had never seen in modern warfare. Harris gave the command, "Fix bayonets," even though they were already fixed. It was a signal. His men lifted their rifles, bayonets gleaming. 40 men, in a line. Ready. Weber stared. What were they doing? And then Harris gave the second command, the one that hadn't been used in combat since World War I. Charge! The charge that shouldn't have worked. 40 American soldiers ran, screaming, through snow, across 100 yards of open ground. Rifles held forward, bayonets leading. No ammunition, no supporting fire, no artillery, just men, running. At a German line 3 times their size. For 3 seconds, the Germans didn't react. They were too shocked. Bayonet charges didn't happen anymore. Not in 1944. Not with automatic weapons. Not with modern warfare. But it was happening. Weber screamed, "Fire! Fire!" The German line opened up. Rifles, machine guns, at point-blank range. Harris saw Morrison go down. Chest shot. Saw Hayes fall. Leg shot. Saw 3 more men drop. But the charge didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because once a bayonet charge starts, you either reach the enemy or you die trying. There's no going back. 50 yards. More men falling. Jackson down. Williams down. But 35 men still running. Still screaming. Still charging. 25 yards. The Germans were reloading. Frantic. Some trying to fix their own bayonets. 10 yards. Harris was in the front, sprinting at full speed. He saw a German soldier raising his rifle. Didn't slow down. Drove his bayonet forward. Impact. The German went down. Harris pulled the bayonet free. Kept moving. Around him, his men hit the German line. Bayonets, rifle butts, fists, knives. Brutal. Savage. Primal. The kind of fighting that soldiers hadn't done in 30 years. But it was working. The German line broke, not gradually, instantly. One moment, they were a disciplined unit. Next moment, they were individuals, running, scattering, trying to escape the Americans who just charged them with nothing but bayonets. Harris stopped, breathing hard. Around him, his men were standing. Some wounded, some dead, but standing. The Germans were gone, retreated, broken. Harris couldn't believe it. They'd charged, and won. What Harris didn't understand, what military analysts would debate for decades, was why it worked. The answer was psychological. The Germans had expected surrender, or defensive fire, or retreat. They hadn't expected an attack, especially not a bayonet charge. And when faced with soldiers running at them with bayonets, screaming, willing to die, the Germans' training had failed them. Because training prepares you for rational threats, not irrational ones. And a bayonet charge in 1944 was completely irrational, which made it completely effective. The cost of insanity. Harris walked the battlefield, counting. 12 men dead, 8 more wounded seriously, out of 40, 50% casualties. But they'd held the position, and the Germans hadn't come back. Morrison, the one Harris had seen go down, was still alive. Chest wound, bad, but breathing. "Sarge," Morrison whispered. Harris knelt next to him. "Don't talk. Medic's coming." Did we win? Harris looked around, at the bodies, at the wounded, at the 28 men still standing. "Yeah, we won." Morrison smiled, then passed out. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, reached the position 2 hours later, with reinforcements, ammunition, medical support. He found Harris sitting on a log, rifle across his knees, bayonet still attached, blood on it. Patterson sat next to him. "Sergeant Harris." "Sir." "I received your runner's report. You charged the Germans. With bayonets." "Yes, sir. That's the most insane thing I've ever heard." Harris didn't respond. "It's also the bravest thing I've ever heard. You saved this junction, held the line, against impossible odds. We lost 12 men, sir. You saved 28, and you held the position. If you'd surrendered, the Germans would have cut our line, divided our defense, probably won this sector." Patterson stood. "I'm putting you in for a Silver Star. Your men, too." Harris looked up. "They deserve more than that, sir." "I know. But medals don't bring back the dead. They just recognize the living." Patterson left. Harris sat there until dark, thinking about the charge, about Morrison going down, about Hayes falling, about the 12 men who hadn't made it. He'd ordered them to charge, and they had, without question, without hesitation. They'd followed him into the most suicidal attack imaginable, and 30% had died. Harris would carry that for the rest of his life. The charge that changed Doctrine. After the war, the U.S. Army War College studied Harris's bayonet charge. It was an anomaly. Bayonet charges had been phased out of modern warfare after World War I. Too many casualties. Not effective against automatic weapons. But Harris's charge had worked. The analysts wanted to know why. They interviewed Harris, interviewed his men, interviewed captured German soldiers who'd been there. The conclusion was surprising. The charge worked not because of tactics, not because of training, but because of psychology. The report stated, the bayonet charge succeeded because it violated enemy expectations. German forces anticipated surrender or defensive positions. The aggressive charge, while tactically unsound, created psychological shock. Enemy cohesion broke before physical contact was fully established. Recommendation: bayonet charges remain a viable last resort option. When? 1. Ammunition depleted. 2. Surrender tactically unacceptable. 3. Enemy expects defensive posture. 4. Psychological shock can be leveraged. Key factor: leadership. Soldiers will not charge without absolute confidence in their commander. The last point was critical. Harris's men had charged because Harris had charged. He hadn't ordered them forward while staying back. He'd led from the front. First man to hit the German line. First man to engage with bayonet. That was why they followed. The Army updated its infantry manual, added a section on shock assault tactics. Bayonet charges were reinstated as a last resort option, not preferred, not standard, but viable when everything else failed. Harris's charge became case study number 1, taught at every infantry school, every officer candidate program, the platoon sergeant who charged when Doctrine said surrender, and won, the sergeant who became a teacher. Harris stayed in the Army after the war. Could have gone home, could have taken his Silver Star and left, but he stayed. Someone needs to train the next generation, he said. He became an instructor. Fort Benning, infantry school, teaching young officers and NCOs, not just tactics, leadership. One of his students asked him once, "Sergeant, when do you order a bayonet charge?" Harris thought for a long time. When there's no other option. When surrender means losing something more important than lives. And when you're willing to be the first one to charge. What if men die? Men will die. That's war. Your job isn't to prevent death. Your job is to make their deaths mean something. If you order a charge, you better be sure it's for something worth dying for. Harris taught for 23 years, retired in 1968, moved back to Tennessee, died in 1995, age 76. His funeral was attended by over 200 people, former students, former soldiers, men he'd trained, men he'd led. One of them, now a retired colonel, gave the eulogy. Sergeant Harris taught me that leadership isn't about being smart. It's about being decisive. It's about doing the hard thing when the hard thing is the only thing. And it's about being willing to go first. Always. That was Harris's legacy. Not the charge itself, but what the charge represented. The willingness to lead from the front, to do the impossible because the alternative was unacceptable. The weapon that never disappeared today. Bayonets are still issued to American infantry. Not as primary weapons, but as last resort options. Soldiers still train on bayonet drills, still practice bayonet charges, not because they're likely to use them, but because the training teaches something else. Aggression, the willingness to close with the enemy, to fight hand to hand if necessary. Modern combat instructors use Harris's charge as an example, not of tactics, but of mindset. This is what happens when soldiers decide they will not surrender. They will not retreat. They will attack, even when it seems impossible. That's the warrior spirit. That's what wins battles. In Iraq and Afghanistan, there were multiple instances of bayonet charges, small unit actions, ammunition depleted, enemy closing, and soldiers charged with bayonets, just like Harris did in 1944. It worked then. It worked in 2004. Because the principle is timeless. Aggression defeats hesitation, every time. The men who charged. There's a memorial at Fort Benning, Infantry Hall of Fame, dedicated to infantry soldiers who exemplified the warrior spirit. Harris's name is on it, along with 40 others. His section reads, Staff Sergeant William Harris, 2nd Platoon, Easy Company, Ardennes, 1944. Led bayonet charge against superior forces, held critical position, saved 28 soldiers. Simple, direct, but it doesn't capture what really happened that day. The fear, the decision. The 3 seconds before Harris gave the command when he knew he was ordering men to die, and giving the command anyway, because surrender wasn't an option. Retreat wasn't an option. The only option was forward. into the enemy, with nothing but bayonets and courage. 12 men died in that charge. Their names are on the memorial too. Morrison, Hayes, Jackson, and 9 others. They died doing something no soldier should have to do, charging automatic weapons with bayonets. But they did it, because Harris led, and soldiers follow leaders who lead. William Harris was that leader, for 40 men, in a frozen forest, when ammunition ran out. And the enemy was coming. He didn't surrender. He didn't retreat. He gave the command that hadn't been given in 30 years. Fix bayonets. Charge. And 40 men followed him. Into hell. And through it. Because sometimes, the only way out is through. And sometimes, going forward into impossible odds is the only choice that makes sense. Not because it's smart, not because it's safe, but because it's right. And when the choice is between surrender and charging into death, real soldiers charge. Every time. That's Harris's legacy. That's what he taught. That's what his men learned. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's charging forward despite it.